Apartment living can be rough. Weird noises, racist neighbors, flesh-eating zombies. You know, the usual. But you wake up and carry on with your day, relieved from the close confines of the building by the opportunities offered by the big wide world just outside. Or maybe you hunker down, settling into the small private moments of joy found in the simple act of closing your door. But what happens when both of those freedoms are stripped away? Not only has the government quarantined your building, but you are trapped inside with a news crew filming your every move. In this episode of Horror Joy, we continue our deep dive into found footage horror and investigate the 2007 Spanish language film Wreck, directed by Jaume Balaguero and Paco Plaza. The horror of Wreck is the claustrophobic feeling of being trapped in an apartment with an unknown threat. The news camera pulls us this way and that way, always after the most sensational shot. But digging just a bit deeper, we realize that the bigger horror is the ability of the government to quarantine a building without notice, effectively sentencing the inhabitants to their death.
Wreck cues us into the political nature of horror. Not only are we confronted by the power of the government, we are reminded of the social and historical anxieties of Spain, rooted in fears of immigration and the dilution of culture. Likewise, we can read Wreck in 2025 as a tool for analyzing ICE raids, the increasing horror of government control, and the latent bigotry made manifest of our neighbors and communities. So, grab your camcorder and smooth out your hair. We're headed straight for the story of the century. But if you get tired, don't worry. We'll record everything while you are sleeping. This is Horror Joy. We're your hosts. I'm Brian Onishi.
And I'm Jeff Stoyanoff. We're two professors celebrating the emotional and intellectual joys of horror.
All right, y'all. We're back again. This is Horror Joy. Today we are talking about Wreck. This is a Spanish language found footage horror film. I think it gets talked about in this kind of renaissance of found footage horror. We certainly have Blair Witch Project as a main kind of instigator of this huge kind of influx of found footage. We got Paranormal Activity, obviously coming in hot. In 2008, we get Cloverfield, but this is just before 2008's Cloverfield. We get 2007 Wreck. It brings in zombies to the found footage horror thing. If you haven't seen it, I'm not sure if that's a spoiler or not. What we get is a crew of people working on a show called While You Were Sleeping. And what they want to do is they want to showcase all the things that you don't see because you're asleep, which seems like a cool project. A cool project that ends up on public radio or something like that, people are listening to or whatever at the end of the night or trying to get to sleep. I don't know. But things get very, very interesting. And I think there's something here about the compulsion to record, the compulsion to catch the story that goes on throughout the film. So one of the things we get in found footage horror is the question, why is the camera rolling? So we have that answered here. It's a camera crew. They go to an apartment building, and all of a sudden, they find themselves quarantined in an apartment building, and a lot of strange things are happening. Violent things, things they can't explain, things that the authorities inside the building can't explain, and that the authorities outside the building are refusing to explain. And so we get lots of different kinds of horror, but zombie horror is part of that. We are going to talk through Wreck today. Jeff, you are, I think, the found footage guy for this podcast. You have declared that you think maybe the Blair Witch Project is your favorite movie. You have told me many times how much you love found footage, and I'm so glad that you did, because we got to talk to Anthony Cousins, which was so much fun, and watch Frogman. But here we are with Wreck. Wreck and Frogman are found footage, but they are incredibly different in scope and even theme. So I'm going to turn it to you and just ask you this. Why found footage? What do you find so compelling about it? And are there other favorite found footage stuff that you like? And then maybe take us into some Wreck conversation.
I will double down. Blair Witch Project is my favorite horror movie. I just rewatched it Saturday after getting back from Washington, D.C., and my husband went to bed. He was like, I'm not watching this again. I've seen this too many times. And I was like, you can go to bed. That's fine. I'm going to pop this DVD in with all of its grainy quality here in 2025 on the Xbox that serves as a glorified DVD and Blu-ray player. And, it's still great. And it's because of the found footage medium, the found footage genre that we're using. Obviously, when we're watching a movie or reading a book or playing a video game, there's that built-in suspension of disbelief that has to work for fiction to function. With found footage, it like pushes you beyond suspension of disbelief to maybe we might call it an attention of belief, where like you are watching the filming happen. And so part of your brain is like, okay, so I'm watching them film this thing. So it's not just like I'm watching a movie, I'm watching someone document something and I'm there with them. And so there seems to be this validity brought to it. Whereas if we just had a video of three people out in the woods camping who suddenly happen upon an abandoned house and are like tortured by children or voices or some supernatural entity in the woods, that's not nearly as compelling because the fear is removed. You're not there with them, you're just watching them. And when you're in a found footage movie or you're watching a found footage movie, there seems to be something about where you're identifying with that first person recording of the camera or the camcorder. And I think sometimes in some ways it like just harkens back to if you grew up in the 90s, your dad or your uncle or your grandpa or someone had that giant honking camcorder that they had to hold on their shoulder, and they were filming everything from Easter morning to campouts to birthday parties to Christmas to weddings. And so like a lot of my childhood is fondly re-remembered or was fondly re-remembered when we still had a VHS player, watching these memories and moments on these camcorder VHS tapes, because like back then you put a full-size VHS tape in those things. Once I went into college in 2003, I think I did buy a Hi8 camcorder, like the one they're using in Frogman, where like it's just the smaller camcorder with the smaller tape that you had to buy the adapter for. And you record a bunch of stupid stuff because you're a 20 something or a 18-year-old, 19-year-old, 20 something, and you're like, I'm a filmmaker suddenly. So maybe that's the other part of found footage where it seems that this is something anyone could do. And in the simplicity of that, there's beauty because this isn't someone who's needs a set, needs costuming, needs lighting, needs all of like the sound, the technical elements that I think honestly for a found footage film, you need fewer operational elements than Brian, you and I have here on a podcast even. Like you just need a camcorder and you need to point it at something. So when it's horror, it's like watching your local news, It's like you see these things happen and you're like, oh wow, this is happening out there somewhere. And I believe it because it's on this film, it's on this medium that is infinitely manipulatable, whatever the word is. Yet I am going to believe in the veracity of it because I've seen it being recorded. So it's like it's kind of some of the meta commentary we talked to with Anthony Cousins on our last episode about Frogman. But I think it's also there's a nostalgia factor there and we talked a little bit about this on our episode with Severance and analog horror, where there's a nostalgia element to it that seems more authentic. I think the way in which horror films are shot, or some of the earlier horror films like Night of the Living Dead, for example, also lends itself to that documentarian style. And so for Blair Witch Project and then Frogman, which I know is 2023, but so Blair Witch Project, Paranormal Activity earlier on, and then this Wreck from Spain in 2007, it plays on that. And like you said, Cloverfield as well, which is kind of monster, kind of disaster, all rolled into one. There's something about that documentary style that appeals to people, and when you add the horror element to it, for some people it's too close, like it's too real. For me, I think it's great because it's so close to being real, and it does really allow you to believe in something like that. And maybe a bit of a spoiler alert, listeners, Brian and I are going to have Michael Wehunt for October Film Hunt on in a few episodes from now, where we'll be talking about, again, Wehunt's new book, October Film Hunt. And that book does some really cool things with found footage and the genre. And talks about The Ring too, which I don't often think of The Ring as found footage, but I guess in a way it is. It's like the reverse of what I'm talking about. Rather than being the people recording, we're watching the people watch the found footage or found footage-ish documentary. So with Wreck, Brian, to turn us back into our conversation specifically of Wreck here, I think what it does really well is it captures that local news team element of found footage where, it is, like you said, it's while you were sleeping. It has this element of low budget, just a camera out there in the world recording things, but it happens upon something. And what it happens upon is, at first, it just seems like there's maybe an older woman who's gone crazy and has started attacking people. But as it develops, we realize, oh no, we have some type of outbreak. And they never call it zombies in the film. But again, this is like 28 days later in that entire franchise, where even because we're not calling it zombies doesn't mean that it's not, in effect, zombies. And it's terrifying because you are in that first person perspective from the eye of the camera. And at times, there's not always a person behind the camera, which is interesting. Like this movie does that where I guess Blair Witch does this once or twice too, but like this movie plays on that a few times where the guy will set the camera down, pick it back up, put it down again. Eventually it's just down because our camera person is out for the count. But we encounter the horror alongside our news team, and even amid the horror, like they try to push us back into normalcy by interviewing the little girl who has tonsillitis, by interviewing the bigoted guy who's lived there with his mom the entire time, who we assume is like this gay Hispanic man who was really interested in the comb over going on. It's like, buddy, just give it up, man. That's part of the horror in this movie, is that comb over. But yeah, like it presents a cohesive narrative too, which I think I we don't always see in found footage. But Rec definitely has a cohesive narrative, and you know that they planned what you get at the end, which we'll talk about, from the very beginning, because it all unfolds, and like we're left in the unknown, but there's not any dramatic irony because we don't know anything more than the characters who are recording know. So we are finding out with them. We are on this exploration of horror with them. So Brian, I guess I'll turn it over to you. How how do you see this found footage genre working effectively in Rec? What about this movie plays on this genre so well that you found compelling enough to be this is one that you recommended that we have a look at. So you recommended, get it?
We'll get a rim shot in there for that one. Good pun, I think. But so one of the things that I kept thinking about while I watched Rec, and I watched it for the first time kind of for this, is that the camera is in part in control. And like you said, there's times when it gets put down, and what we get is just the audio. We just hear what they're saying, and that kind of drives the story forward. But in many ways, the camera is doing two things. Number one, it's a character. I remember watching Cloverfield in 2008 or whatever and thinking I'm really smart because the camera is a character itself or something like that, right? Whatever. Let's move past that. But I think like you're saying, it's the invisibility of the person holding the camera that allows the audience to then take up the spot of I'm there in the room. I am the camera. I'm holding the camera in some way, right? So I think there's that part of it that immerses you into the activity of what's going on. And some found footage horror does this really well, and some found footage horror it's a little clunkier and so less effective. I think Rec does it well. I think you do feel like you're part of this. And there are also times when they shout like keep recording, record everything. And I go, yes, yes, I don't want to miss anything or something like that, right? And I think that I think that demonstrates the effectiveness of that aspect of it. But two, the camera controls what you see. And this is, of course, just the way that movies are art in a way. They are giving us a presentation of the world and they're directing our attention. And I think that what's so difficult about found footage is that it doesn't, at least not usually, have the benefit of something like montage, where montage is like the image one after another. So you can move from one image to the next. And like the workout sports montage, right? That's always the one. But you don't get that just as a cut from one angle to the next or one scene to the next. There's no fadeaways, there's no dissolves, any of that kind of stuff doesn't happen in found footage. And so you have to stick with it. And that's why sometimes it feels like it's really slow. I think that also reinforces that sense of realism. Like, I'm here, I'm stuck here. I can't like be in the building and then the next scene I'm outside with the police officers. I don't know what's going on outside. I'm stuck. And so I think that there's something really compelling about the way that it does that. One thing that I read an article called Real Evil, A Critical Reassessment of Found Footage Horror by Javier Aldana Reyes, or maybe it's Xavier Aldana Reyes, sorry for saying your name wrong. But one of the things that it mentions is just that the popularity of something like Rec, in part, is how it plays into first person shooters. So the experience of watching Rec is in some part similar to the experience of playing a first person shooter. I'm walking the hallways. I'm the kind of first person horror film is happening here, and I think that makes sense to me in many ways. You were mentioning just like the way that found footage works and like the camcorder and capturing life, and my dad certainly had that giant clunky camcorder with the VHS you put it in. But something got me thinking about American Beauty, and this is 1999, and there's that like, the floating bag and the beauty of the world and all that stuff, but also The Office is 2005, right? Like in some ways, we are here in 2005, and I think that Kevin Wetmore Jr., who of course we've had on the podcast, would kind of describe this as partially a movement from 9/11 and the capturing of the real in 9/11 to the desire to capture the real. I want to capture the real life of an office. So we have a show called The Office. It's so silly and so funny or whatever. But found footage, I think, takes it in a different direction, at least found footage horror, where we're trying to capture the reality of this thing. And we need to capture everything. Because if we capture everything, not only does that make us a lot of money because it's sensational and it's spectacular and all that stuff, but it reinforces that this actually happened in many ways. And I think that there's something interesting about how that works. Another thing that I read, and maybe I can turn it over to you just to kind of talk a little bit about the connection between what's going on in Rec and maybe what's happening here in our time right now. The idea that what's being captured in Rec is the cultural context of Spain. So there's an article called The Pain in Spain, an analysis of horror auteur Jaume Balaguero's films by Brian Michael Goss. And one of the things that he really talks about is how immigration was a huge deal at this time in Spain. It was fairly new, and because it was so new, it had created a lot of anxieties about people that were not Spanish living in Spain. So you mentioned this, part of the context we get is like the kind of racism of at least one of the characters. They talk about an Asian family, and at one point he says stuff like, it's the Chinese, they're eating raw fish. And this is 2007, right? And I can't help but think of COVID and all of the accusations towards Asian people. He has no interest in distinguishing between the different kinds of communities that are very different culturally. But it also reminds me of something like Bat Eater and Other Names for Cora Zhang. This is a recent horror book that does the same thing, talking about COVID. But the immigration aspect of it, I think, is really interesting because not only do we get at the very end a callback to maybe a anxiety about immigration, right? But I think that we can read this forward. Obviously, this is not happening in 2025 USA, that the film is not. If we read it forward and we say, look, let's take Rec as a tool for analysis for what's happening right now in the United States 2025, it's hard not to think of the ICE raids. It's hard not to think of DHS for two reasons. One, the violent control of communities, regardless of the safety of those communities. The government knows what's best and therefore is going to do whatever they want to do, regardless of the safety and the good of those communities. And number two, all of the footage that we're getting from protesters and even body cams sometimes, but protesters specifically, we are getting so much found footage, right? It's placed on the internet, but we're getting the experience of these ICE raids in 2025 through this kind of found footage element, and it's horrific, right? Not in the way that Rec is horror, but the way that this is horror. So I'm going to turn it back to you. I don't know if you have stuff to say about how, one, really how we can make connections between what's happening in Spain, what's happening in the cultural setting of that time, but really how we can read Rec right now in 2025. I'll pass it over to you.
Absolutely. I mean, as soon as you were talking about I think we're meant to assume the older gay man in the building who's complaining about the source I have here that I'll cite in a minute claims it's a Chinese immigrant family. It made me think of the line from the 24 election of Donald Trump. They're eating the dogs, they're eating the cats, like it's this absurdity. And immigrants have always been marked by eating something that the dominant culture in a place doesn't like, doesn't approve of, thinks gross. Whether it's your great grandma who was Polish, who was eating pickled pig's feet, or it was your neighbor who is from Zimbabwe eating some type of cuisine there that would be non-normative for, your basic hyper-processed, hyper-industrialized food system that white folks eat from here in the United States at this point. Or like Zoran Mondami, who was being critiqued by some jackass on Fox News, probably that dipshit Jesse Waters, who has a giant boner for Stephen Miller, and they could just go off and make love and probably save most of the world, but instead has to talk about Zoran Mondami, being eating with his hands and how that's somehow uncivilized in the year of our Lord 2025, when I mean most people are eating a sandwich for lunch, and I hate to break it to you, bud, but you eat a sandwich with your hands. And if you don't, I think Howard Hughes would like a word from The Aviator. Like I just it is insane how that type of xenophobia, honestly, I forgot all about it in this movie, but it is insane how it pops up still over and over again. So I think there's a lot of merit to read this film forward, to look at ICE. And I think a more devastating observation that you made is that we could go to YouTube or TikTok, or if you're an old like us, Instagram Reels, and see videos of folks who are being detained by ICE officers, quote unquote, and it's truly horrific. And listeners, like I don't know that I would recommend that you go and watch any of these, but maybe it would be good to open your eyes to see what's happening out there, because it is horrific to watch these masked men come into communities in unmarked vehicles and steal away people's fathers, people's mothers, people's sons, people's daughters. There's a video I watched a couple weeks ago where a father is torn away from his crying daughters. And you have to lack any type of heart or any sort of empathy to see that and think to yourself, yeah, but he crossed illegally, and therefore he needs to go back. Like Donald Trump's taken the steps we need to make this country great again. Like, I'm sorry, like we will never fundamentally agree that that is the right thing to do. That is truly horrific, and there is no joy in that horror whatsoever. I did mention a source I want to come back to really quickly. Shelagh, Rowan-Legg, Don't Miss a Bloody Thing, Wreck in the Spanish adaptation of found footage horror. This was published in 2013 in the Studies in Spanish and Latin American Cinemas. This, Brian, is kind of getting to what you were talking about with why found footage for something like this and how the found footage is making some commentary. So I'll just read this quote quickly. The form of discourse of the horror genre allows for revelations that might be dismissed in a comedy or drama that purports to reflect empirical realism. Wreck, situated in the context of journalism, a journalism program, shows the tenants revealing their own superficial concerns and prejudices. One, an older gay man, is concerned about his appearance. The mother of a young child constantly interrupts to complain that her husband is trapped outside. Several of the tenants blame a Chinese immigrant family and refer to their dietary and hygienic habits as proof that they must be the source of the disease. It is revealed, however, that the first human source is a little Spanish girl, part of a seemingly typical Spanish family. The danger, then, comes almost as much from the other tenants as from the infected. Spain is a relatively recently multicultural society. The monoculture imposed under fascism meant that immigration from other nations came to Spain later than other Western nations. So, and mainly for economic reasons, which is, of course, why immigration happens. So, kind of what you were saying there, Brian, but also to point out that, again, the caller is coming from inside the house. The danger is someone who is native born, which in so many of these narratives where we try to blame the outsider is in fact the case, that the violence is being disproportionately, this isn't immigrants who are committing gun violence and drug violence and gang violence in the United States of America. It is native born, US, mostly white citizens, and frankly, rural areas. It's not Portland, it's not Chicago, it's not New York City. It's areas like where you and I live, where there's domestic violence. It's areas out in the wild, wild west of Oklahoma and Texas and Arizona and Utah, where gangs of good old boys are dragging people behind trucks. I mean, it's been a minute, but don't worry, listeners. I'm sure they'll pick that one up again at some point, unfortunately. But, instead, we'll turn to blame the outsiders as a result. And maybe that's why Rec works so well is because it's this constant misdirection for us. And like we are, and I like your conversation about the camera being a character as well. So as the camera, we are moving around following the action, and we're the only evidence we have are what folks are saying and what we know through what other folks are saying. We don't actually have any thoughts unto ourselves about what's happening. We're just processing as it goes. And so, the reveal eventually that it's the little girl who had tonsillitis, who is not patient zero. I mean, I guess she's human patient zero. Is all the more shocking because the entire time you're just thinking, oh yeah, it's not the kid, it's not the kid, and you're trying to figure out what happened to the old lady upstairs, what happened to the building superintendent, and all of these things. So, Brian, I guess one of the other elements of Rec that's not necessarily found footage, but it's something that we talked a little bit about with Hereditary, is the role of the child in the horror here, and how, we are trying to blame outsiders, trying to blame immigrants, when in fact the actual patient zero again is right in front of us as this little girl. So I'm wondering, if you have any response to that. If not, move us on and forget I asked.
Yeah, I think you're right, and I like you bringing in the fact that one, it's the threat that's coming from inside the house, and two, in 2025, again, reading this forward, we can see that this is certainly the case. We always try to blame the outsider, but in so many of the cases that we're seeing, where ICE are picking up people that are allegedly right criminals, they are either nonviolent criminals or have no criminal record whatsoever. But in fact, the violence that's being done to these communities is, I mean, more severe than anything that would actually be done by the communities themselves. And I think that we need to keep our eyes on that. The one thing I do want to bring up is, so again, spoilers if you haven't seen it, at the very end, we get a clearer picture of how the virus came in. And it is from a young Portuguese woman. So somebody is, so we, Spain and Portugal are right next to each other. I personally don't have a huge grasp of how those cultures interact with each other. The kind of introduction of this virus that ends up causing the kind of, zombification of people in the apartment does originally come from Portugal, but it also comes from the church, right? So there seems to be some kind of demonic aspect here that just gets revealed at the very end. And I think there's more in Rec 2 that gets explained, but there is somebody who's doing experiments. There's some kind of enzyme or thing that mutates, and I think it gets transmitted to the dog of the young girl. I think Jennifer is the young girl's name, that gets bitten by rats or something like that. So there's rats in the experiment. There's the Portuguese girl, and again, that's part of, I think, the anxiety about immigration. So I'm not sure if that's something we need to revisit or not, but I do think that it highlights these two different sources of worry. In many ways, it highlights the source that's inside. It's a domestic source of violence and a domestic source of danger. But there's also this worry that, oh, what we're doing is we're bringing it from the outside. The religious aspect is something I think we'll get to later. Or at least maybe I'll ask you what you think about it in a little bit. The one thing that I did want to talk about, I want to go back to that article that I read called Real Evil, a critical reassessment of found footage. And something that I think the claim that it makes is that found footage is not a subgenre of horror because it has no thematic anchor. Like we talked about Frogman, Cloverfield, Blair Witch Project. We go back to Cannibal Holocaust. We can go to The Last Broadcast, which are earlier found footage films. We'll talk about The Bay. These are not similar in theme. They're not like slashers, right? I think there's a couple of things that are that are a source of continuity among them, and I'm not sure that I buy the argument fully in the article. But this is what the article is making, and the question that I kind of had for you as maybe the found footage guy here is that let's imagine that we go with this and we say, okay, it's not a genre, but something like a style. It's really about the technology that we're using, and maybe it's a critique of different kinds of ways that we capture the world. But I was thinking of something like Scream, and there are rules, right? We've talked about this. There are rules in a slasher, and you can identify them. And my question is really like, can we fit, if it's the case that we can kind of fit any theme into a found footage, it's not just horror. We could do found footage comedy, found footage romance, etc. But there's still rules, right? Right? If the rules are based on the technological limitations, right? It's like, why is the camera rolling? We have to have a reason. Anthony Cousins talked about this with Frogman. Found footage seems to require this kind of technological continuity. You were talking about the VHS tape. And I was thinking, like, what if we found footage from the era of VHS tapes? It would be a difficult task to actually watch them. And the thing about Ring that you mentioned too, I just want to mention this real quick, I think is really interesting because in the Ring, we're watching the people that find the footage. But in most found footage, if it's found, it's unclear who found it, and it's unclear why we're watching it. All that to say is, I think what I want to know is your take on the idea that maybe found footage isn't a genre because it doesn't have a thematic anchor, but that it's a style. Are there rules to it? And does this matter at all? I don't know. I'm throwing it back to you.
No, I really like this, and I think it's yeah, it's a genre. I mean, like what are we responsible now for writing our theory of found footage as a horror genre? I mean, we could, but that's something maybe listeners stay tuned, and or sponsors who might want to sponsor us and our deep dive into found footage. Maybe like Sony camcorders are trying to make a comeback or something, or Panasonic, or I don't know if any of these brands still exist anymore. I know Sony does. I'm much more about Panasonic, honestly. When you were talking about this, the first thought that went through my mind was if the epistolary novel is a genre, then found footage is a genre. The epistolary novel, listeners, for those of you that might not be familiar, is a novel written through the form of letters. And in some ways, it might be like the forerunner of the found footage movie while people are documenting what happened to them, but it's not live necessarily as much as it's being relayed later through a letter. And you see these in Frankenstein, Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. You see them in a bunch of like 19th century novels where it's the dominant form because people communicated then through letters. I think the equivalent for us would be a novel told through text messages. I think, you mentioned American Beauty earlier. So another Kevin Spacey call out would be House of Cards. Now, House of Cards is a television series, did that really interesting and innovative at the time, showing the text messages on the screen as the characters were communicating. And like just as a side note, it really sucks that Kevin Spacey is such a shitbag because I really love his movies and some of the TV shows that he did. I think American Beauty still foundational movie in the Jeff Stoyanoff canon of growing from a teenager into an adult, if I'm really an adult at this point even. But I digress. Found footage though, like, are there certain rules? Yes, and we know the rules because we know when they're broken. Paranormal Activity abuses as a series, as a franchise, abuses the found footage genre. We bring in like, and this is not to say that you could not have a found footage movie that has like webcams or security cameras watching, but like this is where I think you begin to see found footage when it's pushed too far. Security camera footage is not the same as found footage where the person's behind the camcorder, and I think we all know that when we see it. Even though in Paranormal Activity, the first time that that happens, which I want to say is in the second or third film, like it's innovative and it's spooky because you have the entire house under surveillance. That's almost like a panopticon, to use like a Foucault term. A panopticon is the 19th century prison system where the lookout, if you will, the guard is at the center and can look down any hallway at once. And so Foucault's argument is Western civilization functions with the panopticon where we always think we're being surveilled. And I think that's maybe now truer than ever with our cell phones always listening, maybe not, with the amount of webcams that people like to put a piece of tape over so that it can't be watching. I mean, most webcams now aren't sold without having a little like slide on the top to close it because people are so worried about being hacked and observed or somehow under surveillance. But some of the elements of found footage that make found footage horror its genre are, first, I think, Brian, you said it really well, the camera as a character. I really like that. And I think whether it's The Office or it's Rec, so comedy or horror in this way, the camera is its own character. We see through that character's perspective. That's another element of found footage. There aren't the montage scenes like you're talking about. So you're never removed from the quasi-empirical setting of the camera, to steal, empirical as one of the descriptors from the article I cited a minute ago. The action is at once all of the time and also never because like you're just documenting what happens. Like it's not staged in the sense of we are going to cut to the fighting scene where John Wick destroys 400 ninjas. Like you're going to have to wait while John Wick crawls all 300 steps up to destroy the ninjas. That's part of the beauty of the found footage genre. It's like you said, that makes you wait earlier. And honestly, what you said before you asked me about this question, I think is part of the found footage genre. Why are we watching this? Like, we found it, and why exactly are we watching it? Because there never seems to be any, I mean, like, the editors go in like Blair Witch and say, this was found such and such in the woods, and it's the only record we have of these three people in the woods. And Rec, creates the framing narrative as well. Frogman has a framing narrative that we see more of. Frogman's a little unique in found footage from Blair Witch and from Wreck because of the like movie within the movie-ish element going on, which we talked about with Anthony Cousins. Paranormal Activity, the first one anyway, we found it and we haven't seen these two people living in the townhouse ever again. It's like the last record we have of their whereabouts. So there's like a 1990s cold case type feel to this where these people are gone and irrecoverable. We're not going to find them. One of the other rules of found footage, I think, that we see in almost every type of found footage that we watch is the camera person, someone gets annoyed with the camera person. Put that camera down. We see it in Wreck. We definitely see it in Blair Witch Project, where they even fight over the camera at one point. We saw it in Frogman, where, our director guy is getting annoyed at them just like ribbing him the entire time with the fake accent the one actress has going on. And we'll see it in the Bay. Like, part of at some point you're asking yourself, and the Bay is also different in the way the footage is recorded in the Bay. So that's something that we'll have to come to terms with and talk about for our next episode. But yeah, like there's, so the elements right there. You're always from the perspective of the camera as a character. Things happen as they happen. There is not necessarily a script that's being followed, even though obviously Brian and I both know, listener, there's a script for these films. There's general annoyance with the person holding the camera at all time, but that person is relentless. They do not put the camera down. So, Brian, I don't know if we've established a theory of found footage horror, but yes, I definitely think it's a genre. I'm sorry if that was a long-winded answer.
No, I like it, and I do think that there's work to be done to kind of take these rules that you've described and organize them. We certainly won't do that tonight, but I think maybe we'll just say, look out, stay tuned. Maybe we'll be writing some stuff down that we talk about here on the pod. But one of the things that I wanted to kind of talk about a little bit is really two things. Calling back to the found footage aspect of it, there's one point where there's a demand to rewind the footage. Our main character, Angela, let me see it, right? Let me see it. Rewind, rewind. And so we get this like rewind of the thing. And like there's the moment where kind of time and space become really strange in this movie. And it didn't take me out of it. I think I was intrigued by it, of like this rewinding to rewatch, this spectacle. Number one, did that really happen? We want to verify the truth. But number two, did we get it? We need to share this. This is a big deal. If it bleeds, it leads. This is our trip out of this midnight filming of the fire station or whatever, right? So I think that plays right into everything we've been talking about what's going on here, especially with the sensationalization of like these kind of this kind of footage for the news cycle. It verifies the truth, right? It gives us access to the real, but it also is a scandal, or it's scandalous, or it's sensational, or something like that. The other thing I wanted to bring up, this is just me writing stuff down as I watch the movie, is that they are locked in and they can't get out. And there's just this moment where I thought, this feels a little bit America right now. You look around and you say, things seem to be getting pretty bad. What's going on here? We're bailing out Argentina. We've got ICE raids going on. We are cutting funding to libraries. I don't know, everything, we're just shooting down boats that we think might have drugs on them. Things are getting bad, and we're just like, well, can't get out. How do we get out? Can't get out. We're stuck. There's that. So what I'm really saying, I think, is the effectiveness of the film is to say, I'm going to make you feel stuck. And it did. It made me feel that the terror, the danger of feeling stuck. I think one thing that I personally have is every time I watch a movie and somebody's crawling through the ducts, like, and they're like, they got to, if it's the Breakfast Club or if it's Alien, it doesn't matter, right? The idea of getting stuck and not being able to turn around, every time I think about it, I get like really sweaty. I'm like, oh, what is this? I can't do this. Please, just get unstuck. But I think it brought me to that feeling of being stuck, and that's a horror that I think is there, and it's effective in bringing that out. I think maybe we should get to the joy. Oh, there's actually, sorry, before we get to joy, there's actually something else that I wanted to bring up as you were talking about paranormal activity and the use of like security cameras. And this is something when I watch reels, because I'm whatever, an elder millennial, or I imagine TikToks, there are all these videos of people's like houses as if they're just capturing all of this. Like their houses are surveilled all the time. Every time I see this, I'm like, who has a camera just in their house all the time? Is this normal? I can't believe this. And for some reason, like that feels like a horror to me that we're just always capturing our house, maybe in case something happens while you were sleeping that we can put up on TikTok or Instagram and get a bunch of views. But there's also the generation of Sora videos recently that we've been seeing. These are AI videos, and they all seem to mimic this aesthetic, capturing the really real with the bunnies jumping on the trampoline or people doing different kinds of nefarious activities, etc. So I think that there's a tie here for what we're doing in rec to now what we're doing. And through your conversation, I really like your conversation about surveillance and here technology. And I do think we have to reckon with this in the Bay because the Bay has multiple camera, different kinds of cameras that are going to be edited together. Let's find joy if you're up for it. What do you think? Do you want to start with joy? If I pass it to you, do you have some joy to be found?
I can talk joy. I just want to like make a quick point to your argument about like, this people recording things as like, truthiness or something. I don't know how to phrase it, but while you were talking through that, what made me think about like how's a movie different if it's found footage? Not that we need to give Zach Krieger any ideas, but if Weapons had a found footage element in it, it would be a totally different movie. I guess you do get some police cam footage from the what is that, the James section or the Paul section, one of those two. But like, can you imagine like if you are for some reason Weapons has found footage? It would be so cool. It'd be so awesome. Or like any of these movies. Sometimes found footage just doesn't work. Like there's plenty of examples of found footage films that do not work. Wreck is not one of them. And so the joy to turn to joy is how well the narrative that is crafted is told through the genre of found footage. Like you have to have a story that will fit the genre, and this story definitely fits the genre. I really appreciate what you're saying about feeling trapped. I don't find a lot of joy in that claustrophobia, but I do think that it is done so well. And then by the time we get to the penthouse at the end of the movie, that's opened up, and of course, the flash, the light on the camera gets broken, and they have to show, oh, look, we have more technology, we have night vision. And the monster at the end, the woman from Portugal, like whatever it is, that is so well done. And like, no, I'm not joyful at the aspect of being in a room with it, but I find it really joyful on how well that's done and how well it's using the genre to its advantage. Like the night vision obviously is a little blurry, so you can't see things super clear. So you don't need to have a really good necessarily special effect or, practical effects to make this monster spooky. It's spooky just in the way that it's shaped, and it's like very creepy. The urgency that this movie creates, particularly as it goes on, as they realize they're trapped, as they're trying to find a way out, done really well. It's terrifying. It makes your heart race. The way they use the staircase shots to like have people coming up the stairs after them, that's really done well. So, if you're gonna make a found footage horror movie, you need to make it right for it to work. Otherwise, it seems silly. And Rec does that. So lots of joy there. I think, I don't want to steal any of your thunder, but I think there is some joy in thinking through how this movie speaks to what we're going through now in 2025, like how this is Spain's version. And like, let's be honest, listeners, Western Europe is still going through its own version of MAGA and its own version of nationalism at this point too. So it's not over by any means, but like these problems are not new. They're just revised, reused, recycled. Don't like that. that wasn't joyful. But thinking about ways to combat them and how we can, diffuse them is hard work, but joyful work. Brian, I'll turn it over to you. What joy are you getting out of Rec in our conversation here? And maybe, you have some joyful things you can tease for the listeners about other media that we at Horror Joy here are working on.
Yeah, so I'm realizing now that we didn't even get to the penthouse. Like, we didn't even get to the reveal at the end. And this is all spoilers, folks, if you stuck with us. There's this reveal at the end that there's a Catholic priest. Am I wrong? Right? A Catholic priest has been doing some kind of experiment. So the church is brought in and brought the Portuguese woman, young girl, whoever, to the penthouse. All of those experiments are revealed in a very quick way, but not in a way that it feels dismissive. It's like, I do think that it explains a lot of what we've already seen. So, like you were saying, the movie sets things up and is paid off in that penthouse. But it's like confusing enough for me to not really have a clear grasp of how the church plays into this. And it reminds me of, so if you're a reader of horror, especially weird fiction, The Great God Pan is about these experiments trying to get beyond the reality to the spiritual or something, and it brings something back. Right? There's lots of stories like this. I don't know if that's what's going on here. I don't know how the church plays into this, but you're talking about MAGA, and especially we could talk about Christian nationalism, et cetera, in the United States today, and all that stuff. It does feel as if the tension between immigration, the church as a failed salvation. Again, I think this gets played out in Rec 2, but it fails to save the girl. But I will say, in terms of joy, that last few minutes of the movie is just really well done. I think the control of the camera that in many ways takes the reader or the watcher along with them is very effective, right? That they go up into the attic and I'm just, or not the attic or whatever, they're up in the penthouse. And I'm just like, yeah, it's very scary. And like you're saying, I'm not finding joy necessarily in the violence that's done or the being in the room, but the effectiveness of using the technology to generate unease. My question, my question is why? Why the quote unquote monster has a hammer? It's really unclear to me. What they're just walking around with a hammer. Also, what have they been doing the whole time? Like they have had to been up there for a while. Like this is just a bored monster. I don't know. There's something really, but I think that scene is just so incredibly effective. I think about this a lot, especially in terms of jump scares. The camera impacts the way that we view the world. It blocks the peripheral view, and I get so frustrated sometimes when I'm just like I want to peek around the edge and I can't because the camera my only portal into this world. And so in many ways it plays with that tension of like I'm in this world but I'm not in this world, and I think that there's some joy for me just in that play. The staircase shot, I'm 100% with you. I was going to bring that up. It's just like a man, I thought levels of hell right there. Like you just look down and levels of hell keep descending down and down and down, and it traps you. It's very, very good. I do love it. Yeah. So incredible amounts of joy just in the effectiveness of using the camera. I am curious about the hammer. I'm curious about the hammer, and I'm curious about the church. I don't know how those play in. But yeah, we've got some stuff coming out. We're hoping to set up a Substack, hoping to set up an opportunity to at least engage with you a little bit better, get some transcripts out for interviews, but also just have some other written stuff. Jeff and I work on this stuff. We want to be able to get some stuff that's written down in a different way, give it to you, our thoughts in a different mechanism. So we are setting up a Substack that is going to be coming out soon. So look out for that. If you're interested, look out for the subscription, a free subscription. We're not setting up a paid subscription. It's not yet, but we'll see. If you do want to buy us a cup of coffee, you certainly can. We have the link up. You can follow our link tree to buy us a cup of coffee. But man, there's a lot of people that need it right now. And so if you want to spend your money elsewhere, we do understand. People are hurting with the government shutdown. Send your money where it needs to go. Please help as much as you can for those that are in need. Jeff, we're at the end here. We've done some good work with Rec. We've talked about immigration. We've talked about how we read it forward. Any final thoughts on Rec and our second entry into the found footage cluster here.
And this is a good one. This is one of the best examples of the genre. The sequels, they diminish as they go. The Hammer, I think at one point they had the Hammer, Brian. I don't remember exactly, but if you have a hammer, of course you're gonna go smash things. That's how this works. But no, that's really all I have to say. I'll echo Brian. If you want to buy us a cup of coffee, awesome. But also, there are plenty of people right now who are hurting and can use your money. If you have time in your schedule, if you don't have money, maybe volunteer. Your local food bank can always use help with volunteer hours. There are people with the holidays coming around who are going to be especially hurting, and I think we need to make sure that we can help bring them joy. More joy and less horror in that regard. Less of the waking horrors of 2025 anyway. But Brian, if you have any final thoughts, I'll turn to you. If not, I'll sign us off.
What's the saying? Everything is a nail to a hammer, something like that.
Yeah.
I think that's just what it is. Take us away, Jeff.
Well, listeners, thank you so much for joining us for another episode of Horror Joy. If you see Nicole Kidman, she is on the side of a milk carton. We are still waiting for her to be freed from that auditorium. Don't let the tabloids get it wrong. Keith Urban and Nicole Kidman have separated, not because they're not in love anymore, but Keith Urban literally cannot find Nicole Kidman. She is stuck in an AMC theater auditorium, likely somewhere in Kansas City, but who really knows? But in all seriousness, listeners and AMC, if you're listening, we can still use sponsors. But remember, when you're out there in the world, seek joy, even in horror.
This has been an episode of Horror Joy, produced in conjunction with Axis Mundi Media. Thanks for joining us. We want to hear from you. You can find us at Horror Joy Pod on Instagram or at Horror Joy Pod on YouTube. You can also email us at horrorjoypod@gmail.com, all one word. And you can, of course, find us wherever you get your podcasts. Give us a like, subscribe, leave a review. Until next time, remember, seek joy, even in horror.